Hi, welcome to Fong's Fables. Let's start today's story. My grandmother gave birth to 6 daughters before finally having a son. She thought it was her own fault, so when it came time to choose a wife for my dad, she set her sights on my mom. Juanita has wide hips, she's built to have sons. Mom didn't let her down. 2 months after the wedding, she was pregnant. 9 months later, she gave birth to me, a girl. I always knew my grandmother didn't like me, but I never imagined she'd go so far as to get me a fake disability certificate just to skirt my country's one-child policy. When I was 7, my mom got pregnant again. She already had a daughter with intellectual disabilities, but that didn't stop my grandmother from hoping for another grandson. That summer, when the wheat fields turned golden, my mom confirmed her pregnancy. That day, for the first time in 7 years, my grandmother placed a boiled egg in front of my mother. In our house, eggs belonged to my dad. Meat too. The warm blankets, the thick cotton clothes, all his. Women don't need good food, my grandmother always said. Women don't get cold. Your father is the pillar of this family. He needs to eat well and stay warm. When I was little, I didn't understand. Once, I stole a bite of his scrambled eggs. My grandmother whipped my face with a cane so hard that one of my front teeth broke. "You little rat, what are you sneaking looks at?" she snarled. "This is for my precious grandson. If you so much as lick it, I'll skin you alive." I wasn't even looking at the egg, but she still smacked me on the back. A preemptive warning. She believed that if she hit me before I made a mistake, I wouldn't dare make one. I wanted to tell her she didn't need to warn me. After that beating, the mere sight of eggs made me sick. "Mom, don't get mad." My mother pulled me into her arms. She didn't argue with my grandmother. She just forced a smile and pleaded. "You promised me. I'm pregnant now. You'll let Penny go to school." My grandmother sneered. Her eyes glinted with satisfaction. "That idiot? What's the point? A girl going to school is a waste. There's plenty of work at home." My mom's eyes widened. Her voice trembled. "No, that's not what you said before." For the first time in my life, I saw my mother raise her voice at my grandmother. My grandmother froze for a moment, then lifted her hand, her face twisting with rage. "You ungrateful wretch. Yelling at me over some worthless girl?" The slap was coming, but my mother suddenly stood up, her pregnant belly pushing forward. "Go ahead. Hit me. Hit me and kill your grandson." My grandmother's hand stopped inches from my mother's stomach. She let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, so now you're threatening me? I want my daughter to go to school. If you don't agree, I'll get rid of this baby." "You wouldn't dare. Try me. You're cruel. You heartless woman. You'd kill my precious grandson over a useless girl?" My grandmother collapsed onto the bed, wailing and slapping her thighs in despair. I hid behind my mother, unable to see my grandmother's expression. But at that moment, my mother seemed so tall. Her hand, trembling behind her back, reached for mine. I held her fingers tightly. That night, as I lay under the moonlight counting my fingers, the door creaked open. My room was actually the woodshed. My grandmother refused to share a room with me and claimed I was bad luck for my father. So she put a wooden plank in the shed and called it my bed. It was my mother. She stepped inside, motioning for me to stay quiet. I quickly covered my mouth, nodding obediently. She closed the door as silently as possible, then sat beside me, opening her hand. A boiled egg. She smiled at me, cracked the shell, and peeled it carefully. In the moonlight, she held it out, urging me to eat. I pressed my lips together, remembering the sting of that cane whip. I shook my head. I didn't want the egg. I never wanted to eat eggs again. Tears welled up in her eyes. She pulled me into her arms, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why she was apologizing, but I didn't want her to cry. I wiped her tears away and kissed her cheek. "You did nothing wrong, Mom. I love you." She held me even tighter. Then, bit by bit, she broke the egg into tiny pieces and fed them to me. "Don't worry. Your grandmother won't know." With those words, I finally swallowed a bite. I didn't throw up. That night, I fell asleep in my mother's arms. I dreamed she gave birth to a little brother, and my grandmother never hit her again. I thought, if only I were a boy, maybe Mom wouldn't have to suffer. The next morning, my mother took my hand and marched me to the village school. My grandmother threw out every excuse she could think of, but my mother wouldn't back down. Whenever my grandmother blocked her path, my mother pressed her belly forward. "Just wait till you give birth. I'll make you pay for this." My grandmother couldn't fight her now. She could only curse and spit at my mother's retreating figure. I shivered. "Mom, What if Grandma hits you later? Her expression filled with something I didn't understand. She squeezed my hand and forced a smile. It's okay, sweetheart. I'll figure it out. Years later, I finally realized she had no plan. She just wanted to give me a few months of freedom, a chance to live without fear, before her time ran out. When she was 3 months pregnant, I started school. I loved school. No chores. No beatings. I was older than my classmates, but they bullied me, chanting "little retard" every recess. I didn't dare fight back. I was afraid the teacher would send me home. I didn't dare tell my mother. I didn't want to upset her. So I found a solution. I spent every recess asking the teacher questions. Even the meanest kids wouldn't tease me in front of the teacher. But it was exhausting. I was terrified the teacher would think I was stupid. So I kept pushing myself, flipping ahead in the textbook, trying to find harder and harder problems. I buried myself in books, not just to learn, but to escape. My teacher looked at me with growing surprise. He said he had never seen a first-grade student so motivated to learn. He was a college graduate from the city, so he didn't understand. What was hell for other kids was paradise for a girl like me. At the end of the semester, I scored a perfect score on both my exams. The teacher rewarded me with a beautiful pink pencil case and a certificate of achievement. I ran home, clutching them with excitement, only to be met with a slap the moment I stepped through the door. The sudden blow sent me tumbling to the ground. My ears buzzed, and my face burned with pain. You little brat. Trying to make me look bad, huh? Don't forget, you're supposed to be a retard. My certificate was snatched away and stuffed into the stove, turning into black ashes. I held onto the pencil case tightly. It wasn't broken. But that didn't stop Grandma from grabbing it, turning it over in her hands before sneering. At least you're good for something. She took my pencil case with her. When she returned, it was gone, replaced by a bottle of my father's favorite liquor. That's when I understood, Grandma wasn't like other parents. She didn't want me to succeed. Because I was supposed to be a fool, an officially certified one. If anyone discovered I wasn't, then the baby in my mother's belly would be at risk. All winter break, Grandma kept a strict watch over me. She hid my books and assigned me endless chores. If I didn't finish, I couldn't sleep. And she made sure my mother wouldn't help me. Mom's belly was huge now. They said in 2 months, she would give birth to my little brother. But I was scared. Grandma always said that once the baby was born, she'd settle accounts with Mom. I wished my little brother would stay in her belly forever. But time didn't listen to me. Soon Mom went into labor. She screamed and cried for a whole day and night before finally giving birth. To a girl. A girl? Puffed. All those eggs I fed her. Might as well have fed a dog. Useless woman. You were born to bring bad luck to our family. You've cursed my son, making sure he has no heirs. Grandma's curses and wails echoed through the house day and night. She refused to cook for Mom, wouldn't let me go to school, just kept crying and cursing. Sometimes, when my father came home from playing cards and heard the noise, he'd shout once to make her quiet down, for about 10 minutes. Then, as soon as he left with his winnings, she'd start all over again. For the first time, I realized how useful my father could actually be. Mom was weak from giving birth, and Grandma still refused to cook for her. If she caught me trying to make food for Mom, she'd beat me and steal whatever I made. Mom managed no milk at all, so my baby sister was so hungry she didn't even have the strength to cry. Late at night, our kind neighbor Aunt Susie would secretly bring over a bowl of porridge. I fed the broth to my sister and gave the solid grains to Mom. We ate in silence, just like how Mom used to secretly feed me eggs a few months ago. It's okay, Mom would whisper, stroking my hair. Her hand was thin, like a brittle tree branch. Just wait a little longer. Once I can get out of bed, things will get better. Aunt Susie once told me that after giving birth, a woman should rest for a full month to recover. But Mom only stayed in bed for 2 weeks. One morning, she woke up to find me and my baby sister missing. I had just returned from the little shop, carrying a bottle of soy sauce, when I heard Mom's desperate cries from far away. I held the bottle tightly, pushed past the kids calling me little retard, and ran as fast as I could. Our yard was crowded with people. Mom was on her knees, clutching my sister's lifeless body, sobbing uncontrollably. She crawled into the well on her own, Grandma said flatly. I was just watching her for a little while. I looked away for 1 second and she fell in. I was helping you take care of your baby and now I get blamed? Grandma stood there without the slightest trace of sorrow. I saw my baby sister's pale face. The bottle of soy sauce slipped from my hands. shattering on the ground. The dark brown liquid spread across my clothes. Suddenly, Grandma let out a loud, dramatic wail, this time, even louder than before. She lunged at me, ready to hit me again. But before she could, Mom threw herself at Grandma, knocking her to the ground. One arm held my sister, the other shielded me. "I'm calling the police." Mom's voice was hoarse but firm. "You killed my daughter. She couldn't even crawl yet. How could she fall into the well by herself?" Mom's back was slightly hunched, but she still stood tall. Grandma scrambled up and, hearing Mom's words, started shrieking again, slapping her thighs dramatically. "You ungrateful wretch. You want to ruin our family? You're cursing us to have no descendants. And now you want to frame me for murder." I don't remember what happened after that. Aunt Susie took me away to her house. She cooked me a bowl of noodles. I wanted to save half for Mom and my sister, but Aunt Susie's eyes were red as she said, "Don't save it. Eat it all. After you sleep, I'll make more for your mom." I did as she said. After finishing the noodles, I fell asleep on her bed. In my dreams, my baby sister had grown up, but she never spoke, only cried like a little kitten. Mom never reported Grandma to the police. Instead, she divorced my father and took $500 with her. We moved back to my grandparents' old house. Mom packed lightly, bringing only a few clothes and my school bag. My grandparents had passed away long ago. I had never met them, and Mom had no siblings. There was no one to stand up for her. The house was old, covered in dust. Aunt Susie walked us home, helped us clean, and then accompanied us to the back hill. There, we found a quiet spot overlooking the house, where we buried my baby sister. Aunt Susie murmured words I didn't understand. "Juanita, the little one is gone, but you still have Penny. If you report her, Harry won't let you go. If something happens to you, what will Penny do? And besides, that's still Penny's grandma. If she goes to jail, it'll affect Penny's future. It's better to take the money and move on. You and Penny still have to live." Mom wiped her tears, her voice as light as drifting dandelions. "It's my fault. I failed my children." Aunt Susie held Mom's arm and turned to me. "Penny, be good to your mother. Study hard." I asked, "Can I still go to school?" Mom stopped walking. She looked me in the eyes and nodded firmly. "Yes." I went back to school. After settling into our old home, Mom picked up a hoe and started tilling the land my grandparents had left behind. She sowed seeds, raised a few chickens, and after carefully calculating our money, even bought a piglet. "By the end of the year," she said, "we'll sell the pig and pay for your tuition next year." And just like that, we started over. Every day after school, I'd run home as fast as I could, grab my bamboo basket, and head out to collect hay. I had been doing this since I was little. It wasn't hard at all. I just wanted to help my mom with as much as I could so she wouldn't have to work so hard. Life was tough, leaving us little time to grieve for my little sister. But I made it a habit to sit with her every day while collecting hay, telling her about everything I had learned in school. Even if she was a ghost, I wanted her to be the smartest ghost out there. On the day I brought home my 6th first-place award, my father got remarried. My grandmother stood at the door, throwing handfuls of wedding candy, bragging to anyone who'd listen that the new bride had wide hips and was sure to give birth to a son. I saw it from a distance and deliberately took the long way home. Mom was cooking when I walked in. The moment she saw my award, she put down her spatula, ran over, and smothered me in kisses. That night, she made a special meal, an old hen that had stopped laying eggs, to celebrate my achievement. For the past 3 years, Mom had been raising chickens, pigs, and growing vegetables. In the beginning, she would cook just 1 egg a day for me. I refused to eat it alone, insisting we share. As the chickens multiplied, she started cooking 2 eggs every day. 1 for me, 1 for her. At dinner, she gave me a drumstick, I gave her the other one. She put my award on the wall, smiling. "A few more years and this wall won't be big enough." Lying on my stomach, working on my homework, I laughed. "Then we'll just use them to wallpaper the whole house." Under the warm glow of the lamp, she looked at me, eyes shining. "Yes, my precious girl will be the most successful of all." 3 years ago, when Mom divorced, she took me to change my name. I wasn't Penny anymore, I was Precious. She said I was her treasure. Always. But our peaceful days didn't last long. My father's new wife got pregnant soon after the wedding and gave birth to a big, chubby baby boy. My grandmother was ecstatic, parading him around the village like a trophy. She especially loved lingering near our house, shouting, "I told you that woman was cursed." She nearly wiped out my son's bloodline. Pfft. The moment she's gone, I finally have a grandson. See, even mentioning her makes my precious boy cry. I overheard her as I walked home from school, my fists clenching. I wanted to argue with her. Our teacher had said that the gender of a baby is determined by the father, not the mother. This wasn't my mom's fault. I was just about to march up to her when I heard my mom call out, "Precious." I turned around and saw her standing by the door, waving me over. I understood. She didn't want me to waste my energy on people like that. I swallowed my anger and walked home head down. Before I could step inside, my grandmother sneered, puffed, calling her precious all the time. As if she deserves it. Hope the name doesn't backfire and get her run over by a car. Mom yanked me inside and, as always, placed herself between me and the outside world. Then she looked straight at my grandmother and said, "Your new daughter-in-law must be pretty brave, huh? Letting you watch her child. Isn't she afraid he'll end up at the bottom of a well too?" Then she slammed the door shut. No matter how much my grandmother screamed outside, she didn't say another word. "Precious, don't waste your breath on her. You're different. You're going to college. You're going to the big city." I asked, "Mom, what's the big city like?" She thought for a while before answering. "I guess it's a place where they won't stop you from studying just because you're a girl." I nodded. That sounds like a great place. Mom's words eventually reached my father's new wife. Our family's past wasn't exactly a secret in the village, so she didn't have to dig too deep to find out. From that day on, she never let my grandmother get near her son. No matter how much my grandmother tried to explain, she didn't believe her. She guarded her child like a hawk, even making my grandmother taste her own cooking first and waiting 10 minutes before eating it herself. Aunt Susie told us that my grandmother barely started crying about her situation before the new wife shouted her down. She ran to complain to my father, but all he cared about was playing poker. If she nagged too much, he'd just yell at her too. Their house, despite having a new son, wasn't any happier. It was more chaotic than ever. Meanwhile, Mom and I were doing better and better. She was hardworking and frugal, keeping our home in perfect order. My grades remained at the top of my class. In 6th grade, my teacher visited our house. "Precious Mom, she's too bright to waste her time at the town's middle school. I suggest you take her to the city to take the entrance exam." That night, Mom took out all the money we had, counting and recounting it late into the night, just like she had before buying that piglet all those years ago. The next day, she made up her mind. "Baby, we're going to the city to take that exam. There's a special admission program for top students from small towns." It was my first time visiting the town center. My first time eating a hamburger. My first time sitting in a classroom with a projector. I carefully wrote down every answer, double-checked every word. I couldn't afford to make a single mistake. After the exam, Mom didn't ask how I did. Instead, she took me to the park and bought me a giant cotton candy. It was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. The acceptance call went to Aunt Susie's house. She ran over, shouting the news so loudly the whole village knew. "Juanita's girl passed the entrance exam for the city school. Too bad she's just a girl." Mom had grown bolder over the years. She shot back immediately. "What's wrong with being a girl? Your mother's a woman too, isn't she?" That shut them up. The city school was amazing, but expensive. Mom thought long and hard. Then she sold all our chickens and pigs, gathered every last coin, and took me to the city. She rented a tiny room near my school, bought a secondhand tricycle, and a bunch of pots and pans. That's how she started selling street food. Only then did I realize, while I was taking my exam, she had been outside talking to vendors, figuring out how to make a living. City life was expensive. Water cost money. Even fire cost money. Every morning at 4 a.m., Mom rode 10 kilometers to the market to buy the freshest, cheapest vegetables. Then she'd prepare everything, washing, chopping, skewering, before setting up her stall at lunchtime. She wouldn't come home until late at night. I wanted to help. Instead, she got me a library card. "Precious, I heard the books there are free. You've always loved reading, go read." "But," I wanted to say, "but you're working too hard." She lightly tapped my head. "Your job is to study. Leave the money to me." So every day, I packed a steamed bun and my water bottle and spent my time at the library. Books were truly free. And there was free drinking water too. That summer, I read more books than I had in my entire life. And Mom's food stall? It was thriving. Unlike others who cut corners, she made sure everything was clean. Even the pots and pans gleamed. It just looked trustworthy. In the first month, Mom made $3,500, more than what we used to earn in an entire year back in the village. She kept counting the money over and over, tears in her eyes, saying, "This is enough for tuition. We can make it in the city." Before school started, Mom bought me a pair of white sneakers and a new backpack. She said, "All the young girls wear white sneakers now. If you don't have a pair, your classmates might look down on you." She was right. Many girls in my class wore white sneakers. But theirs were the fancy brand name kind, the kind that cost more than what Mom and I spent in a month. On the first day of school, my deskmate tapped my shoe with hers. "Precious, I think your shoes are knockoffs." I looked down, confused. "What's a knockoff?" She gasped dramatically, then asked, "Don't tell me you've never heard of Nike?" I shook my head. I really hadn't. Our classmates crowded around, bombarding me with questions. "Where on earth did you grow up? How do you not know this stuff?" There was no malice in their voices, just pure curiosity. So I told them my story. I told them how I got into this school, about our chickens and pigs, and how my grandmother didn't want me to go to school just because I was a girl. I explained how feeding livestock and harvesting crops were my version of common sense. They didn't laugh or look down on me. Instead, they stared at me in admiration. "I heard you were the top-ranked special admissions student. How did you even do that?" Someone asked. "If it were me," another student added, "I'd be too busy just trying to survive." A girl handed me a cookie. "Here, this is for you. But it's not a handout. When I visit your home, you have to take me to pick fruits." I looked at the cookie in my hand and smiled. Mom was right, city people were kind. No one here treated me differently just because I was a girl or because I came from the countryside. Soon my story spread. Everyone knew about the special admissions student whose mom ran a street food stall to pay for her education. Mom's business boomed. My classmates started showing up to support her, and she had to buy twice as many ingredients to keep up with demand. At first, some parents were skeptical, worried about hygiene. But their kids dragged them to Mom's stall, where they saw the spotless cooking station and gleaming pots and pans. They couldn't argue with that. During my first semester of middle school, my grades weren't great. Out of 800 students, I barely made it into the top 100. My biggest weakness was English listening comprehension. I lost a lot of points there. Plus, I was struggling to keep up with the fast-paced curriculum. When I came home from my first semester exams empty-handed, without a single award, Mom didn't scold me. Instead, she smiled and said, "Now that's more like it. You can't take all the first-place spots forever. You need to leave some room for improvement and give other kids a chance too." She didn't blame me. She comforted me. That winter break, I buried myself in studying. The library had plenty of practice books, and I worked through them one by one. I used up an entire box of pens, and my fingers developed calluses. I was good at self-studying and previewing lessons, skills I had honed in elementary school. I spent my entire winter break learning ahead, finishing exercises, and making sure I understood everything before the new semester even started. When school resumed, I could finally keep up. By the midterms, I was back in first place. At the parent-teacher meeting, Mom was invited on stage to share her parenting tips. She stood there nervously, rubbing her hands together. Finally, she said, "I don't have much education. I don't have special techniques. I just love my daughter. No matter what Precious does, I support her. She's the one who studies hard, not me." The other parents exchanged glances, probably thinking Mom was bragging. After the meeting, she pulled me aside and asked cautiously, "Precious, did I embarrass you?" I shook my head firmly and clung to her arm. "No, my mom is the best, most amazing mom in the world." Mom and I both knew the truth. I wasn't some genius. I was just someone who poured every ounce of time and effort into studying. I had no other options. I had to push myself. Hard work made up for my shortcomings. The dumb bird flew ahead by starting early. By the time high school entrance exams came around, I ranked first in the entire city. I was admitted to the best high school, and my name was displayed proudly on a banner at the school gate. The school even awarded me a $20,000 scholarship. When I handed the money to Mom, she was so shocked she started crying. "You mean you can actually make money by studying?" She hugged me, laughing through her tears. "This is amazing. Amazing. This is enough for your university tuition." I wiped her tears away and said, "Mom, the teacher told me that if I do just as well in the college entrance exam, I'll get another scholarship. If I get into a prestigious university, the reward is $100,000. Mom nodded. That summer, we didn't return to the village. I stayed ahead by studying high school subjects in advance, determined not to fall behind again. Mom, meanwhile, made the biggest decision of her life. She used 3 years of savings from her food stall to take out a loan and buy a small house near my high school. The house had 2 floors, one for us to live in and one for Mom to open a real restaurant. 3 years after moving to the city, we finally had a home of our own. Mom decorated my room with a pink wardrobe and a study desk. Soon after, she launched her restaurant. At first, she managed everything herself. But as business flourished, she had to hire 2 employees to help out. Before the new school year started, Mom took me to a proper flagship store and bought me a real pair of Nike sneakers. Honestly, I didn't care whether my shoes were real or fake. I would have preferred 2 new sets of practice workbooks instead. If it weren't for my grandmother showing up at our doorstep, I might have completely forgotten about my painful past. The day I took the college entrance exam and ranked first in the city, 11th in the entire province, I was interviewed by reporters. Just as they were about to ask me questions, my grandmother shoved them aside and grabbed my wrist, yelling, "Penny, I finally found you. Why haven't you come home to see your dear grandma all these years?" The reporters froze, staring at the white-haired old woman. One of them turned to me and asked, "Is this your grandmother?" Her grip on my wrist was painfully tight. She leaned in and, in a voice only I could hear, sneered, "You ungrateful girl, I know top schools give out money. Hand it over so your little brother can go to middle school. If you don't, I'll spread your dirty secrets everywhere. You'll never be able to show your face again." I looked at her, completely unfazed. Facing the reporters' cameras, I spoke clearly and firmly. "Yes, she is my grandmother. I used to be called Penny, but after my mom's divorce, she changed my name. This grandmother of mine never wanted me to go to school because I was a girl. To make sure my mom had a second child, she even faked a disability certificate for me, claiming I had intellectual disabilities. She promised my mom that if she had another child, she'd let me go to school. But after my mom gave birth to my little sister, my grandmother deliberately placed the baby near a well, causing her to fall in and drown. I have never been afraid of people knowing my story because everything my mom and I have today, we earned with our own hands." The reporters were stunned. They gaped at my grandmother in disbelief. "Ma'am, did you force your daughter-in-law to have another child just because you wanted a grandson? Are you aware that what you did was illegal? Don't you know boys and girls are equal? You're a woman yourself. Why do you look down on girls? Now that you're here, are you trying to take advantage of Precious again?" Their voices were full of righteous anger. They instinctively formed a barrier between me and my grandmother, blocking her from getting any closer. My grandmother, realizing she had lost control, completely lost her temper. "You ungrateful wretch. You worthless money-draining girl. Your brother needs money. Hand over your prize money right now," she screamed. "You're just a useless girl. Studying is pointless. Get back home and tutor your brother. I always knew raising you was a waste. I should have strangled you the moment you were born." She had no idea how powerful the media could be. She shouted her true thoughts without restraint, unaware that the cameras were rolling, capturing every ugly word she said. Though her curses wouldn't make for a traditional news segment, they made an excellent case study for gender equality advocacy. As I expected, that very evening, a news outlet released a report on deep-seated gender bias, using her outburst as prime material. But I wasn't done yet. I saved the video and sent it to Aunt Susie, who had a smartphone. By the time my grandmother returned to the village, everyone had already seen her disgraceful behavior. Even the police got involved, reopening the investigation into my little sister's death. She was just 2 weeks old. Precious was sent out on an errand, and Juanita was resting after childbirth. When she woke up, both kids were gone, a villager recalled. She claimed the baby crawled into the well herself. But come on, how can a 2-week-old crawl anywhere? Even if she did fall in on her own, it's because that wicked old woman left her at the edge of the well. That woman was never a good person. When Precious was little, she once ate a bite of scrambled eggs and got beaten so badly with a cane that her front tooth fell out. The truth seemed obvious, but the case had happened too long ago. There was no physical evidence left. My grandmother refused to admit to anything, and my father kept insisting she wasn't guilty. In the end, there wasn't enough proof to convict her, but her reputation was completely ruined. In the village, a bad reputation is as good as a death sentence. Even without legal consequences, living a good life became impossible for her. According to Aunt Susie, every time my grandmother showed her face outside, people pelted her with rotten vegetables and eggs. She couldn't even stay home in peace. Our family name was forever tainted. Her precious grandson, Lenny, was already a failing student. They had hoped to use my scholarship money to buy him a spot in a good middle school, but instead, they destroyed their own future. At school, Lenny was ostracized. Everyone called him the grandson of a murderer. He was bullied so badly he couldn't lift his head. Unlike me, he didn't have the strength to endure. He started skipping classes, and his grades plummeted even further. As for my nearly invisible father, even his gambling buddies abandoned him. With no one to play with, he became irritable, taking his frustration out on the family. His new wife wasn't much better. She hurled insults at my grandmother every day, saying, "You're an old woman. Shouldn't you be earning some good karma? When you die, don't expect Lenny to pay his respects to you." That hit my grandmother where it hurt. She adored her grandson. The thought of him refusing to honor her after death was too much to bear. She collapsed on the spot. Though she wasn't seriously ill, her spirit was broken. Then, one night, she let out a wailing cry. "I'll give my life to make it up to you all." And with that, she jumped into the well. Her scream woke half the village. They got to her in time, but she had hit her head on the way down. She didn't survive. I learned all of this from Aunt Susie. I thought to myself, she probably didn't really want to die. If she did, she wouldn't have shouted for the entire village to hear. But in the end, what goes around comes around. I set my phone down. For the first time in years, the heavy resentment in my heart finally lifted. "Sister," I whispered, "the one who killed you is dead. Did you see that? Precious, if you have any requests, just let us know. Our university will do its best to accommodate you," the prestigious university admissions officer said with a warm smile. I snapped back to reality and, feeling a little shy, asked, "Would it be possible to let my mom open a food stall in the campus cafeteria? She makes amazing spicy hot pot." "Of course," the officer agreed without hesitation. I turned to my mom, grinning. "Mom, let's pack our bags. We're moving to new capital." She gave me a look of playful annoyance. Who brings their mom to college? I didn't care. I don't care what others think. I just want to see you every day. After graduating, I didn't pursue a master's degree. Instead, I accepted an offer from a top company. Thanks to my solid skills, I was earning $100,000 a year within just 2 years. Recently, my mom visited our hometown and mentioned that house prices in the city might drop soon. She planned to sell our apartment before that happened. She also told me that Lenny never made it past middle school. He ended up working in a factory screwing bolts. He quit after 3 days, complaining it was too exhausting. He never worked another day. Meanwhile, my father, addicted to gambling, got scammed out of $50,000 and even sold our family's land. And yet, he still refused to stop. "Oh, by the way," my mom added with a smirk, "I ran into your little aunt." "My little aunt? I don't think I've ever met her." "Of course not. After all, your grandfather's 6 daughters were all married off and never looked back. But guess what? One of your little cousins got into Stanford." "Wow," I said, smiling.